Let's talk about writing. I've written a few books, and the thing that I really like about writing is that it's not collaborative. I like the idea that it is me sitting in front of a computer and whatever I'm thinking that day happens to go down on paper and eventually will come out in the book. I love that part of it. I like collaborating. I like having partners around me, just not when I'm doing that.
Right.
What's your take on it? Because I have a feeling that screenwriting is a little different, because you're eventually going to have people, because people are giving you money at some point, and that things may change, or no?
Yeah, it can. I think it sort of depends on the circumstances and what it is that you're writing. I mean, I love the same thing about it. I love the non-intrusive nature of it. And there's, because working on a film, particularly if you're directing something, you just get 80 billion questions. Really, directing is answering 600 questions a day. That's kind of most of it. What color should the car be? I will never forget that on Due South. I was the executive producer of Due South, and that's a little bit like directing a film. I mean, I wasn't setting shots all the time, but I was kind of running the big decisions. And the transportation department came and was, what color should the car be tomorrow? And it's supposed to be, a nondescript police surveillance vehicle. I said, guys, we've been doing these cars for 3 years. Go get a cop car. Right. Use your imagination. Great. So we get up there the next day, and there's this bright yellow convertible. So I realized, no, you do have to actually still make all the decisions all the time. But, the crowded nature of that is just sort of irritating after a while, or it's exhausting after a while. And then it's really great to just go and lock yourself in a room and write. And I have nobody around me. And I mean, I like editing that way too, because you're in just a one-on-one relationship with an editor, kind of poking through the footage. And but yeah, I love the singularity of writing. In film writing, unlike writing books, anything nonfiction or fiction, in film writing, it just becomes a lot of things start coming in.
Right.
Budgets start coming, for one thing. Right. It's wonderful that you've written this enormous spaceship, but you can't pay for it. Okay, the spaceship's gone. You bastards. And that was usually me talking to myself. I was a very stupid boss.
Yeah, well, you have the writer hat and the producer hat. The writer wants the spaceship, and then
Well, in Passchendaele, we had the town. We were going to recreate Ypres from 1917, which was really just rubble, but there was this enormous ruin of this thing called Cloth Hall.
Right.
It went away because it was going to be a $1 million set, and there wasn't enough to justify it.
Right.
So, those things you lose they're pretty hard to give up. But
Terry Gilliam told me he shot for Brothers Grimm this scene where the forest came alive and chased after these guys. It cost $3 million or something, cut from the film. He calls it the most expensive DVD extra ever.
Well, I had a fear that I would end up cutting this big town site of Ypres, and I thought, I can't do that. I would never be able to lose myself. I knew that $1 million was on the floor somewhere.
Right, yeah, because you could make a whole movie for that.
I couldn't do that. But, then what does start to happen is you go to other people for money, like you go to Telefilm, the federal funding agency. They always have lots of opinions about your script. Yeah. Many of which are completely idiotic, but you sort of have to bear with them somehow. Some, once in a while, you pick through there, and there's a couple of notes, and you think, that's actually pretty smart. But most of it is nonsense. And that's actually the truth about most notes. Right. If someone gives you notes, a friend of yours, a story editor, someone who's involved in a producer, gives you notes about your script, if 30% of them are useful, that's a very high percentage. Right. Most of the time, what you get from people are not of much use at all. Right. Because you have to bear in mind that everybody reading the material is reading with the movie they would make, which is not actually how I think people read novels, for instance. They're not reading it to read the book that they would write. Right. But everybody somehow fashions himself a movie maker. Right. And you're constantly, even the most well-intentioned. So you have to be very careful with notes. I think notes can be kind of cancerous, and if you get a bad one in there, it'll worm around and eat at you, and it affects what you do. So you have to be careful who you take notes from. But yeah, it does. There is more, and it's a lot more intrusive in a film script. But I don't know that I would have the. I don't know. I'm pretty sure, at least right now, or up till now, I've not had the courage to contemplate a novel, for instance, because that really is you to the end. I mean, an editor has some input, but then you got to say it's finished. Now, as a writer, I'm not sure that I'm ever quite capable of saying that.
Yeah.
And I look at Passchendaele, and that thing was constantly changing. And scripts always do. Film scripts are always changing, and they change right through editing because you realize I don't need that scene. In fact, this scene can go up there, and we'll do it like this, and I'll add a voiceover here. So you're always shifting things around.
Yeah.
So the feeling of it's never really finished.
Right.
And then you keep holding in the back of your head, if there's something that isn't quite working, music will fix it. that's the last thing to come in.
And then even once it's released, it's like there's always the DVD director's cut.
There's the DVD director's cut where I'll explain why this sucks. Younger people starting in this, it's hard to know when you've got it.
Right.
And you really have to develop a trust in what's around you. The trust in your own material. If you really respond to a scene and you finish it and you walk away and come back a couple days later and read it and think, that's good, just leave it alone.
Right.
Move on to the next one.
What I find when younger writers send me scripts, I find it's always, not always, frequently a series of big moments. Big moment after big moment after big moment. And I'm thinking, where's the pacing? You've got to have small moments so that people realize when the big moments are happening.
Yeah. That's a perfect word, is pacing. And I think that is to me is kind of, I guess I learned that partly out of the theater. And I was fortunate to have, because that's where I began. And great classical literature is symphonic when it's well written. It has slow movements, fast movements. There's tune and, even things like George Bernard Shaw. You follow the tune of that stuff. Right. You get onto a certain thing that is beyond simply the nuts and bolts of what the dialogue is. And I think that film, one of the awful downfalls, I think, of a lot of independent film that I see is that the pace is uniform across the film, and it's boring as a result. Because pace doesn't mean you need to go quickly. It means you have to have some variation in it. It has to move, theme and variation, and you give it some life. And it's fantastic. Like Diving Bell and the Butterfly is one of the most an amazingly paced film. Just on that level, I mean, everything else is great. Yeah. But just on that level alone, the pacing of that, can you think about that? The challenge of sitting down and writing a movie about a guy where you get to look through one
I know.
and not have that be boring.
And a lot of scenes are just people, leaning in to look through. That movie blows my mind. It blows my mind that he got money to make it with his idea anyway, but that it's so beautifully realized.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a masterpiece. And one of the things that really holds that, and it's one of the unseen things in filmmaking, is pace. The pace of that is really astonishing, I think.